So welcome everybody to the NDSU Extension Innovation Coffee Break. Great to have you here this afternoon. I'm Bob Birch, Web Technology Specialist with NDSU Ag Communication and a member of the NDSU Extension Innovation Team. If you want to learn more about the innovation team, I invite you to go to ag.ndsu.edu/innovation. You can learn more about who's on the team and what kind of stuff we're up to. One of the things that we do monthly, when time allows anyway, the summer was a little bit tough, but is the innovation coffee break that you're on now. That is typically scheduled for the third Thursday of the month at 3 p.m. Our schedule changed a little bit this month with there's an extra Thursday in here, so we're technically on the fourth Thursday this month, but you can expect Innovation Coffee Break on the third Thursday of the month. And today the plan was to talk about small group education and small group facilitation. This was a topic that had come up in our team meetings as we were brainstorming some things that we want to talk about. I think, speaking for the team a little bit, a lot of it was influenced by some work that Abbey Wick is doing, and Abbey has been very gracious in joining us today to talk about the Soil Health Cafe talks and some of the small group facilitation that happens there. I've done some work in this area too with learning circles and reading groups, and Ashley Ueckert is here too. And Ashley has done some small group education in online environments. So a lot of experience. I'm sure there's other experience in the room today, so feel free to join in with your experience and thoughts and questions. You can use the chat on the left, or you can feel free to just unmute and share your voice with us as well. So welcome again everybody, and we'll go ahead and get started with our conversation on small group education and facilitation. So Abby, since I know you're on the phone, and that could be tenuous, I'm just going to start with you, and maybe you can just tell us a little bit about the Soil Health Cafe talks, sort of how they came about, and maybe what your intention was with educating in that way.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay? I didn't get unmute again or anything, did I?
Nope, I hear you loud and
Okay,
clear.
perfect. So the Soil Health Cafe talks were something that came about actually from a farmer request. He had come up to me in a massive field day that we had after I first started here in 2012. I think the field day was in 2013, and I think there were like 250 people there. And this farmer said to me, he's like, this is great, and I love hearing from all these specialists, and it's a great turnout, and I'm happy for you. But he's like, if I'm going to do this soil health stuff, he's like, I really need to have a more informal conversation, and I need to get input and ideas from other farmers who are using these practices, and I need to be able to sit and listen, and then come back maybe a couple weeks later and ask the questions that came up in the time between. And so that was one of the things that kind of resonated with me. And I thought, soil health is really a highly specialized area where I mean, we have this new thing with our Soil Sense podcast. It's about the pursuit and not the prescription. So giving, large talks and having large field days where we were giving prescriptions wasn't really going to work in this case. It had to be more of a pursuit, and it had to be a development of personal relationships. So that's where the idea of the cafe talks came about. When we first started them in 2014, we'd have maybe 6 or 7 people at them, and that would be it. Those discussions, even though they're only 6 or 7, I know we talk a lot about numbers and extension, having the numbers for our reporting, but those 6 or 7 people that were there, those discussions are some of the ones that I remember the most, and those relationships built with farmers at those meetings are ones that have lasted. So oftentimes I miss the really small groups like that when we do these now, but we're now kind of on average with a cafe talk having about 40 people there. Some of them we had a doorbuster up in Park River, and we had, I think, 87 at that one. And it was still actually very easy to run it as a small group discussion, even though it was a large group, because the people came to it prepared to ask questions and to listen and to get ideas. So a lot of it's even, no matter the number of people, it's the mindset that people show up to those meetings with that I think is incredibly valuable. So that's kind of the gist of them as far as how they got started and where we are now. So Bob, I don't know if that's a good start to.
Yeah, that's an awesome start. You mentioned sort of facilitating them and maybe, the challenges with bigger groups. Are there particular approaches that you take to facilitating them, um, or have thought about in terms of trying to build those relationships and get the conversation going?
Facilitation was kind of a tricky thing, and I think everybody has to kind of figure it out on their own in some ways. But here's kind of what I did was, I didn't grow up with an agriculture background at all, and I certainly didn't get my training in agriculture. So starting in this position, I knew that I had to listen, and I knew that I had questions that I wanted to ask of people, just on basic things that maybe I didn't quite understand, and just needed some clarification on from the farming aspect. So sure, I knew soils, but I didn't know about farming, and I certainly didn't want to come in and act like I knew about what was needed or what questions people had. So I think in a lot of ways it was kind of vulnerable to open myself up to asking some of those questions and not being an expert. But at the same time, in doing that, it created a really comfortable environment for people to ask questions that maybe they were worried would be dumb, something about soils that they think that they should know, but they just don't, or they need clarification on it. So I think it's okay in our roles in extension to not always be the experts, but to be the ones asking the questions too. I'd also, in those early meetings and still in the meetings, I bring another specialist or researcher with me, and I rely heavily on the county agents to help with some of the discussion too. So it's okay to bring, I call them my safety blankets, but it's okay to bring people maybe that you can ask questions of each other and kind of get the conversation going. It's also okay to call farmers and ask farmers that you know or work with to come to meetings. I've had ones from Wahpeton come to meetings in Jamestown because they were there to support me and felt like, well, yeah, if you need my help and you need me to talk a little bit about what I do, I'll do it. Sure, no problem. So I think it's okay to number one, be a little bit vulnerable and ask questions in these kind of small group discussions, but then also to have people there that you know are going to support you and help you drive the discussion if they see that it's getting a little quiet or you might need a little help.
I think that's awesome. That's a great point about having a supportive team around that. And I've noticed it in my work a little bit when you do have a partner or a group that's facilitating something, that can really be a great safety blanket. It's not all on you in that moment. Jana was asking in the chat, Abby, when and where do you hold these, and what's the role of the agents? You talked a little bit about the agents, but you want to talk about when and where, and maybe a little bit more on the role of agents in these?
Yeah, so because of my let's see, in soil health, you as a specialist, you need to be present and build relationships, ones that you can maintain and continue. So my radius for holding these has been about 2 hours from Fargo, because I know I can get there, have an effective meeting, have that meeting last 4 hours if needed, if that's what people want. I don't schedule anything on the front end or the back end of them because I want to just be available and accessible, and then come back to main campus that same day. So I am with them because we schedule a dozen or so of them per year. It gets tricky with scheduling. So oftentimes, I put out the schedule, trying to avoid some major events in different areas. And then I run it by some of the different agents where we're thinking of having these cafe talks. And then I rely on the agent to help get people there and to provide that local resource that the farmers or the people who attend it can continue to go back to. So we like for the agents to really be part of the discussion. Sometimes it doesn't always work out that way, but we really encourage that, because the agents are the ones that are going to be there for them the next day, and then the next day, and the next day. So that's kind of the role of the agents. This year, what we're doing, because we need to continue to expand further west and further north and west, is that, and also south and west, is that specialists from Carrington Research Extension Center and also Langdon Research Extension Center are linking up with agents to host their own cafe talks out of their centers. And so that's going to get us further west and get more individuals involved. And I think Carrington's maybe going to do 6 or 8 of them this coming winter. I think Langdon through Naeem is going to do 6 or 8 of them. I'll probably schedule about 5 or 6. And we're going to hit more ground and hit it with different different people, and hopefully bring more of this to different counties where where the specialists and researchers from the RECs can provide additional support.
Does anybody have other questions or comments about this for Abby? And again, you can open your microphone or use the chat if you'd like. I'll leave a little space in case someone wants to turn on their microphone. You won't be talking over anybody, so here's some space for some people to chime in. Okay. Feel free to jump in anytime. Don't worry about interrupting. Sue is asking, how do you advertise, Abby?
I primarily advertise them through like McCare does a great job helping us advertise, Red River Farm Network, corn and soybean magazines, because they sponsor these. They usually put an ad in their magazines. I also put it on the Soil Health webpage, and I put it on Twitter, and also through a listserv that I've built up for soil health. For anyone that's attended a soil health event, I advertise specific soil health. I advertise specifically NDSU soil health events. I don't advertise anything else but that, to keep from bombarding people with information, and in particular things that I support either funding wise or in person. So I feel like we get pretty good coverage that way. Twitter has been just an amazing tool for getting information out. So it's, that may be something to look at. I don't do Facebook, but maybe that's another way that people are having success advertising. But usually it's a text to McCare or a phone call to McCare and some of the other radio stations to have them help us get the word out.
Awesome, thanks. And I'll keep watching for questions. And again, feel free to jump in too. Ashley, can I invite you into the conversation? Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, go ahead. So we had talked a little bit about some of the stuff that you're doing. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, actually, this is a good segue, because actually how I came up with this idea was I had heard about what Abbey was doing on the eastern side of the state, and I liked the idea of the small groups and just getting together over coffee and visiting, and tried to figure out how to make that work for somebody who's 350 miles away from main campus and has a small county, single agent county, and how to make that work. And so what we came up with was actually we're taking advantage of being on mountain time and using it to try to get some education in before people go to work. And through trial and error, have figured out this is really still, like everything else, probably just a better winter program than trying to do it year-round. But what we do is working with specialists on campus, or I've actually brought people in from as far away as Arizona and Georgia to do different talks. But we bring them all in interactively through Skype here, or we have used the traditional open public version of Skype. We've used Zoom, different types of, and we do them at 7 a.m. Mountain Time and try to be finished up by about 7:50. We do provide a light breakfast, and try to take advantage of that time before people have to go to work. And it's worked out really well. Averaged anywhere from 2 people to 14 people. And really for what we do, 14 was too many. It started to feel like a classroom. Just because of our space and what we have, we had to set it up more classroom style. There wasn't as much just visiting around the table being set up that way, and just with the number of people. So really a group of 5 to 6 is what works the best for what we've done. And bring them in interactively. I have webcams and speakers, set it up almost like an Ivan system. And I ask whoever's presenting, whichever specialist is presenting, to do 10 or 15 minutes just to kind of get thoughts and questions flowing. And they do a brief presentation, and then we just visit. And specialists answer most of the questions. Once in a while, I chip in and answer a question, and more often than not, someone else at the table will chip in and help answer a question. So you also facilitate a lot of learning between participants, because there's a lot of knowledge sitting around the table that people may not know that the other ones have.
Thanks, Ashley. If you have questions for Ashley, jump in or put them in the chat. What do you think, how has it been different, Ashley, than sort of maybe what traditionally you might do educationally?
Well, one thing was with being a single agent county and my specialty being egg is it's been a way to bring in some FCS programming. And actually, when I've tried it with egg programming, it has not been as successful. Those guys would still rather come in at 2 in the afternoon. And we've done some of this at 2 in the afternoon where I've brought Frayne Olson or someone in to do it. But if I'm doing one that's targeted to egg producers, I will still go for 2 in the afternoon. That 7 a.m. programming we'll do, we've done a lot with Julie Garden Robinson on different, a little bit on nutrition, but more on food preservation and fast and easy meals, things like that. We've done personal finance. We've done holiday budgets. And then we also do a lot of horticulture because it's an easy way to get Tom Kelber, Joel Selesnick to join us without having to really interrupt their day too much. It's their first hour of the day being on Central Time, so I can catch them before they really start their day.
And you, I don't know if you saw the questions in the chat, Ashley. I think you answered Nicole's pretty much. You covered sort of what kind of FCSFCW programming you've done. I'm not sure if you addressed, do your participants, the people who come to those things, come up with the topic ideas, or you do that?
Some of both.
Okay.
When it started, I had a list, and we've kind of gone through that, and now there's a core group of participants that come almost every month when we do this. And so I go to them or they will come to me with ideas and topic ideas to make sure that we're staying relevant and what they want.
Thanks, Ashley. Sue had another question for you, Abby, about the topics. Is there a specific topic for the cafe talks, or is it sort of general soil health, or how do you work that part of it?
For the topics, I usually, by area that we're going to host them in, I kind of think of what the major issues are, the major questions may be, and that's where I'll ask the other specialists to join us. So whether they're weed scientists or disease or fertility or, I get the ideas for the issues from farmers and discussions that we have throughout the year, from field days that we may have in those areas and things they want more clarification on. But just because those specialists are with me doesn't mean we always have a discussion about that topic, which is part of what I really like about them, is that that we're challenged as specialists to learn a little bit about everything and to think on our toes, and that we don't always know what the discussion is going to be about. So there may only be 5 minutes on weed management, but then the rest of the time is spent on cover crops, or it's spent on something on diseases, something that we may not have any knowledge about as specialists, but we talk through some of the ideas. So yeah, usually it's an idea from farmers or from agents in that area as to what would be interesting and which specialists they want, and then we just kind of wing it from there.
Thanks. I see some folks are typing in the chat. Other questions for Ashley or Abby? Leave some space again if you want to open up your microphone, or feel free to use the chat. So I don't know. I'm trying to look at Jody's picture here. Jody, can you hear us, or do you have your mic on? Well, I guess I shouldn't ad-lib like that. I was going to ask Jody a little bit about facilitation, and since that's something that she's focused on. And I see some folks are still typing in the chat, so I'll kind of wait on that. So here's Rebecca's question. When you do an FCS talk, so this must be for Ashley, do you bring in Julie as a specialist? Being so far away, finding a specialist may be tough for us. So I think you covered that a little bit, Ashley, but why don't you go ahead and talk about how you bring them in?
I do. When I've done, Julie has done most of my FCS ones for me. And then I've had other on-campus specialists do most of those, and typically that's what I aim for. The off-campus specialists, we have some good ones down here in the Southwest for agriculture, so I'll try to bring them in for live in-person meetings. But if I'm needing a state specialist, that's when I try to use up this coffee talk format a little bit. and do it, just because it's so far to ask them to drive. And you never know, are you going to get 3 people or 30? So I have had Julie do most of them, or other on-campus staff have done. Carrie Johnson's done quite a few of them for me too, on the finance side.
Yeah, and you're bringing them in from a distance via Zoom or Skype or something like that. So Rebecca, that might be something to think about if you're worried about the distance traveling from Fargo or somewhere else. So Nicole's kind of got a question for the group there. You guys can see that in the chat. Has anyone tried these small groups where attendees all participate remotely or online? Abby or Ashley, how do you think that would work? What are you losing? What might you gain?
I have had like an additional person come in, like had 2 specialists do one, or had Jim, I see you're on the call today. Jim has sat in on some of them that way, and a lot of times it adds to the conversation. But having the majority of the group sitting at one table, it's easier to stop people from talking over each other if you're using the microphone function. Where if you have more than 2 or 3 people on the Skype function and you're trying to use the microphones, it's hard to kind of facilitate that conversation a little bit. If they're okay using the chat function, I think it works. So that would be my take on it, is it works and they do add to the conversation. It's a way to get more people, but it can be harder to facilitate them when everyone's in a group.
Yeah, and so Jim's sharing in the chat that Ashley's brought in folks from out of state too, so like poultry specialists from New Mexico, and technology is obviously an important part in being able to do that. So that's awesome as well. I see some folks are typing in the chat still. Devin's sharing that they did something similar called Farmer's Table, often beneficial, and small groups of locals getting together for these oftentimes raise more questions than if they were to attend a more formal event. Has that been something you've seen, Abby, in the cafe talks?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. One of the things we do with our cafe talks also is I have one of my workers there taking observational information, and they kind of record the topics. They record how many people are interacting, which specialists are interacting, and then they start checking off how many people are on their cell phone and how many people are looking around. And so that gives us kind of an idea of and they also write down the time that topic was covered. And so if it's something that's going 20 minutes and you start seeing that there's 5 or 6 checks on the bottom that people start looking at their phones or whatever, then we know that we need to start cutting those topics off to keep the discussion going. But I think people want that personalized information. I despite what some people think, I don't think they're showing up for the free lunch. I think they're showing up because they want that personalized information and they want to build relationships. And they want to know that conversation is going to keep moving through different topics, so that there isn't a reason to check your phone, that you're fully engaged the entire time.
Thanks, Abby. Got a couple. So Ryan says it's the specialists that show up for the free lunch, Abby, so not the participants.
If I could avoid some of those free lunches, I guarantee I'd be 10 pounds lighter.
So you mentioned relationships, Abby, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that. And I'd love to hear about Ashley's experience with her group too. This is one of the reasons that I think for me, doing education training in these kind of small group settings, and a lot of times what I do will be the same group over time. So like with Working Out Loud circles, we might go like 12 weeks or 12 meetings over time with the same group. And the relationships that people build with each other tend to support their learning in the long term. That's my theory of the things anyway. What have you seen, Abby, from Cafe Talks? I think you talked about relationships between the specialists and the agents and the attendees, but have you seen evidence of sort of those interrelationships among attendees?
Yeah, I have, and that's been really exciting actually. So one of the areas where you can see that is you have a bunch of these different farmers coming to these cafe talks, and then they'll all come to like the dirt workshop that we're having in December, what used to be the CTC, and and it's like they already know each other, and they feel like they have a different bond with each other, not just that they saw each other, but they actually interacted. So that's kind of fun to see, and then they end up mixing up at different tables that way too. So you don't get just groups from specific areas sitting at the same table. You get a mixture of people talking through ideas. The other thing I heard this spring, and well, this just growing season in general, since it's been so challenging, is that several of the farmers that would be at these cafe talks were telling me that they're like, oh yeah, I called so and so, and just because everything was going terribly, and I wasn't sure that my seed placement was good, and I just needed to hear that it was going to be, get some advice or hear that it was going to be okay. And so I heard that from multiple farmers that have been part of this network, and even today one said that it's the group discussions that keep him moving forward. So I think that's really valuable. Maybe, and also it takes pressure off of us in extension too, that people have somebody else to call as well. That's going to be a resource from them, since we can't field every single call and take every email and every text. That was really reassuring to me to hear that this year, that in a really crappy year, that people were relying on each other for some support.
That's awesome. Ashley, you kind of mentioned that you kind of have a group of regulars. So how's that working out?
I do. I have a group of regulars, and it's 4 or 5 that come probably 70% of the time when we have one of these, if it fits into their schedule, no matter what the topic is. And they really it's very easy for those to sit around and visit. And, they'll very easily take in another person when someone new shows up. But I know that if I get 2 or 3 or all 4 of those women there, and my group is almost always primarily women that come in the morning, they will lead a conversation, and we'll have a good conversation. When I don't have them there, I don't always get as good a conversation. It takes more prodding and more facilitating to get those good questions flowing. And I will also say that I mentioned earlier in passing that we do provide a light breakfast because we're going so early. And I have a couple of those women that now when they come, they show up with caramel rolls or muffins, and they've taken on some of that piece too, because they want to bring in and do that. And so they will provide that way and help provide the breakfast and do those things.
That's awesome. Capacity building.
Yes, and I see Nicole put a question here about younger adults, and actually one of my regulars that comes, she brings her 2 kids with her. They are a 5th grader or just started 6th and 4th grade here yesterday, and they come to almost every one as well, because then they'll just walk down to the school at 8 o'clock. And we've done that, and then I also did one on a beekeeping session with a specialist out of Georgia, and that was when I had 14 at, and over half of them were under 18.
Wow.
That's great. So Jim has mentioned in here that, I think, was it last year, I think, that there was some facilitator training that was offered by NDSU Extension. I have not heard anything. I don't know if anyone else, if you didn't see it in the chat, Jim's asking if anyone knows if that facilitator training is going to be happening again sometime. Because, I think it's definitely a skill, and it takes practice, and we can always hone our skills. So that would be awesome. If anyone knows about that, please dump it in the chat or open your microphone and share that with us. Otherwise, we'll have to check in on that offline. Other questions for Abby, Ashley, or comments or your stories about facilitating smaller groups?
Yeah, I would love to hear other people's stories. I heard one actually from a specialist in Wyoming who was trying some similar small group facilitation, and she had said that that actually one of the experiences she had was very confrontational, and it brought up kind of discussion on how do you handle that if things get confrontational, and typically they don't, depending on some of the topics, but But in some cases, I mean, you could have, like in soil health, we have people that walk in and they just say no till equals no crop, and that's all they say. And that can be seen as a little bit confrontational, I guess, in some ways. And then how, thinking about how you diffuse those situations, because these small group discussions, I mean, those could be a killer for the program. If people think that it's going to be uncomfortable or confrontational, or it could be that way. And I'm not sure I have the answer on how to do that, other than to just listen and hear people out, and to not take things personally. And it can feel very personal in these small group discussions, and to make sure that you're not taking things personally if something like that happens. But I think it's important to be prepared, to think about how are you going to handle that situation if something like that does happen. I've only had it happen once, and it wasn't a huge deal, but just to be prepared for something like that, just something I'd never thought about till just yesterday.
Yeah, good thought, Abby. It's a challenge. I know I've talked with colleagues before that have had the sort of confrontations over some more controversial approaches or processes. So knowing how to deal with that is a big deal. Other thoughts, questions, comments? All right, it was a good group, but a quiet group. Thanks for everyone who shared in the chat. I see Kim is typing right now, so I'll stretch things out just a little bit while we wait to hear what Kim is typing there. I'm gonna just remind you, you can find out more about NDSU Extension Innovation Team at www.ag.ndsu.edu/extension. We post the recordings of these coffee breaks there, so please check the recordings out there. There's also a list of your NDSU Extension Innovation Team members, and if you are interested in participating and joining our innovation team, please contact someone on that list. Thanks, Becky, for putting that link in the chat. A reminder that coffee breaks are scheduled for the third Thursday in the month. I know this is throwing that a little bit off. Don't get confused by that. 3 p.m. Look for the email that we send out about the innovation coffee breaks. Kim's comment in the chat there is just, it's important to remember that changing someone's core values won't happen. So yeah, don't get into it, right?
I guess I had a question, probably a little bit more towards Abby, when you're talking about, you're saying you're recording data or behavior data, or what people were doing during the conversations. Have you looked across, tried to compile that somehow across all of your cafe talks to pick up maybe certain things that we should be paying attention to, or maybe themes that have come out of that, or anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. All that information, I actually dump it on an evaluation specialist in Indiana, because it's a massive amount of information, and so she handles all that for me, and enters all that information. What we've done in the past is if say a county agent is interested in having like a field day or something as a follow up to some cafe talks like Brad Drummond did, we looked through the notes from those cafe talks, and we picked out specific topics that were really of interest to a lot of people, and then we use those as to frame the tour. So I suppose it's on kind of like a case by case thing, but if we've had these things in your county, which we have, if there's information that you need from it because you're planning a tour or something like that, then I can certainly have this woman Jean help me pull that together to get that information out. But it's like, it's just massive amounts of information, which has been helpful, and I use it all for reporting too. So it is summarized somewhere. But
so how do you use that for reporting then? Or like, what do you, I always really struggle with, I'm a very, like, the abstract data, when either it is or it isn't. So like the whole people evaluation piece of it, I feel like I struggle with trying to figure out how to even come up with data for that.
Yeah, it's tricky because we're not trained in these things, right? I mean, we just kind of jump in and we're figuring it out. So what I have for that is, I rely a lot on this woman, Jean, and I can share only part of the knowledge that she has because she's amazing. But what we have like for recording this is our sheet has like has specific information on it that we're collecting. So it'll have all the topics that we anticipate covering, and the ones that we'll do the large evaluation on it through Qualtrics every 3 years. And so we use those as our framework to check what's being discussed. So it's a consistent list. It's not like a handwritten list or anything or notes. It's just it's a list that we check. You know, what's this talked about? What's the overall theme? And then at the bottom, just the information on who's checking out basically. We started actually recording names of people who talk in each of the discussions, and that helps us. I think you probably helped with that, Alicia, is kind of figuring out who's participating and who's not, because we may be able to pick out our next cooperators from situations like that. There's a lot of information to compile, which is probably why I've not been good about pulling that really together. But I struggle with it too. It's hard to figure out what's important, what's not, and what's going to help us with reporting. In the case of the Soybean Council, they want all that information listed in the report as the topics covered at each of the cafe talks, and so I provide that to them. But that gets lengthy and 40-some pages and kind of a lot of information.
Well, just one more from the chat. Becky said maybe they're looking up info on their phones rather than checking out. So does that figure into your evaluation, Abby?
It could. If we have a lot that come up at one point, it means maybe they got something about the markets, that everybody got it. But most of the time they're going to look up that information later. They're not going to use that valuable time that they're there being part of a discussion to look up something. So we don't really account for that. We just kind of assume that people are going to be there and they're going to be engaged, and that they'll look up some of those things later. Because if you miss, even just a minute or two of the discussion, it's hard to be part of the discussion. So we just kind of assume they're not looking up information.
Yeah. Well, this has been awesome. I'm going to wrap things up. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and joining us for the coffee break. And I want to thank especially Ashley and Abby, who are so generous with their knowledge today. I hope you'll help me thank them in the chat. Abby won't see it, but she'll feel it. So thanks, everybody. A reminder again, more coffee breaks coming up. We'll have our next Innovation Coffee Break the third Thursday of September, 3 p.m. Watch your email for information about that and more information on the Innovation Team, ag.ndsu.edu/innovation. All right, thanks everybody. Have an awesome day.
Thanks, Bob.